Welcome to Mysteries of Superstition Mountain. I'm Larry Hedrick, where we bring the past into the present for our future viewers. Today we have another great story by Hank Sheffer.
Thank you, Larry. Another character out of the annals of the Superstition Mountain legacy is a fellow by the name of Elisha Reavis, better known as the Hermit of the Superstition Mountains. When I first came out here, what I learned about him was just from the stories, and we don't know much about him. We don't know where he came from. He's just this mysterious guy who managed to pop up out of nowhere. But that really isn't true, because as time went on, I learned there was a whole lot more about this Elisha Reavis than what the legends and the storytellers were letting us know. First off, we know that Elisha was born in 1827 over in Beardstown, Illinois. He went to school like most boys do, and he finally came out of college in 1849, and he was teaching school. He did that for a little while, but he really got bored with it. And then all of a sudden, he got bit by the same sweet scent of greed, I guess you must say, because there was gold in California. So he left Illinois and he went over to the San Gabriel River. That's where he landed. And he was looking for gold over there. And he did that for a while. And he hunted and searched. And it turned out that he finally got bored with that because he didn't do very well with it. And he went back to teaching school for a while. Well, come 1860, he got bored completely. And he left there, and he went over into Arizona. And he was over here hunting and carrying on in the Bradshaw Mountains, looking for gold there. But that didn't really work out again. And so he left there, and he went back to his haunts by 1866 over in California. Now, in California, he met this gal, Maria Y. Sexton, and he decided to get married. And lo and behold, they did that by 1868. And they had one child by the name of Luis Maria. And they didn't really get along very well because the marriage just started, well, it just went bad. He wanted to move back to Arizona, and he wanted to take his family there, but Maria didn't want to do that. She wanted to stay with her parents. So in September of 1869, he just up and leaves, and he heads back to Arizona. And he's back into areas of Prescott. He's running around there. He's running around all over the place. And finally, by 1870, he's down around Fort McDowell. Now, it's interesting that people say that we don't know much about Reavis, when in fact, his name was pretty well known. He had an uncle. His uncle Logan was a fellow who was from Nebraska at this point, and he had decided that what should happen was that the federal government should move the capital from Washington, D.C. down to St. Louis, Missouri. Well, that didn't work out, fortunately. But Reavis also had another uncle by the name of Elisha. And Elisha was a Supreme Court justice who was located down in the McDowell region. Well, now, also we find that Elisha hooks up with his uncle, who's the judge, and he becomes a United States Deputy Marshal. This is probably where he got to understand and know the territory, as we know, the Superstition Mountains, because he handled all of that territory. Well, now we roll around over into 1874. And Elisha Reavis has finally decided he's not going to play any of that stuff. He's not going to be a marshal. He's not going to be a school teacher. He's going to move off on his own up into the Superstition Mountain. And where he went, where this is really going to help you, is what they now call Reavis Valley. Well, now Reavis Valley is about 12 miles back in off of Route 88, and it's a beautiful area back in there. It's one of the few places where there is annual water. It's there perpetually. There's a creek that runs down through that property, and that's where he landed. 4 years later, while he's already set this place up to be a garden spot, literally. He's raising vegetables, he's raising apple trees, he has an apple orchard. But in 1878, I guess to add to his income, if you will, he was also breaking horses and mules and training them for the United States Army. I don't know how long that lasted, but he did it for a little while. But now, meanwhile, back up on the ranch, I love that. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. Gotta love it. At any rate, he's back at the ranch. There's a letter that he wrote to his Uncle Logan, and it's interesting that he says this particular year he had lost all of his crops, and that was going to cost him that season $5,000. That's a lot of money. We're in the 1870s here. At any rate, we know that he's taking this produce and he's selling it to the communities that are around the area. Well, now the story that everybody remembers, and bear in mind, we're after the Ranchero Wars with the Apache and the Yavapais. We're actually after that era. But the way the story goes, and the way he got the name as being the madman, was that one day he was looking out over his property, and he happened to see an Indian walking around. Now, Reavis really didn't think much of Indians, so obviously he didn't think much of them, because he shot the man dead, and he let him lay there. He just left him where he fell. Well, a couple days later, one of his buddies came looking for him, apparently concerned where he'd gone. And as he came up and found the guy, which probably wasn't hard to do, because after several days in the sun, well, you figured out for yourself. At any rate, he found the guy, and about that same time, Reavis shot him dead and left him lay. Well, now things are getting a little cranky here with the Indians. Come a few days later, they came back with a party of braves, and they started a siege on Reavis's hut that he had up there. They shot and shot, and he shot and shot, and as the story goes, he ran out of ammunition, but he was just angry as he could be. But the Indians, now that they had an opportunity to get this guy, they stopped. And the reason they stopped was because, according to the old Indian tradition, they would not fight after dark, and it was now late evening. Well, the Indians all sat down, they built themselves a fire, and they were sitting around just contemplating on the morning sun coming in and how they were going to destroy this old goofy farmer. Well, Reavis, right after dark, the fires are going, and the Indians are sitting there, and they're all in this laid-back mood. They're just waiting for the sunrise. And here comes Reavis, just stark naked as a jaybird, with a butcher knife in each hand, just yelling and screaming and carrying on. And he come running over there, jumped in the middle of that fire, and just started kicking coals in the face of these Indian braves. And they started going crazy because they think he's crazy. And their other tradition says that they can't kill a crazy man, or they'll have to take his place and be as crazy as he is. Well, they ran off, and they let him be. And the way the story goes was they never bothered him again. Well, that's all fine and good. Now he's the madman as well as the hermit. But in the meantime, he's now producing all of these fruits and vegetables and taking them into town. There are people, say, who saw him one of the few times he actually went into Phoenix. Normally he just went to the ranchers and some of the other communities like Florence. He went into Globe occasionally. but he was in Phoenix, and they said that this guy was something to behold. He had a scraggly old beard that was just disgustingly filthy. Had hair looked like it had never had a haircut. And he had this propensity for when he'd wear out a pair of pants, he didn't get rid of them, he just put another pair of pants on top of that. So I guess you could pretty much know he was coming before he got there. But at any rate, he always rode this favorite burro of his, and he carried, as the legend says, a 45-70 Winchester. Well, the problem with that is that it wasn't an 1874 45-70. It was an 1873 38-40 Winchester rifle. Be that as it may. But anyway, they would see him coming into town, and essentially, they said that you could always spot him because he would have 8 to 15 burros. Well, he had another funny eccentricity because he would occasionally sit and drink with people, but he would not go into a building where a woman was already there. He wouldn't have any parts of that. Don't know if it had to do with Mary Y. Can't imagine what the Y was. Mary Y. Sexton, his wife, or what the deal was, but he would not do that. At any rate, he would get his money, get his supplies, and he would head back up to the mountain. Well, as time went on, there were some folks that would go up and visit him periodically because he was getting old. By 1896, Reavis was approaching 70, for you who haven't done the math already. He was approaching 70, he was getting pretty feeble, and apparently had a heart condition. One of the fellows that was visiting periodically was James Delabo. And he had stopped in, and Reavis was getting ready to make yet another trip into one of the towns. We don't know where he was headed, but we know he was headed down toward Rogers Canyon, Rogers Trough area. But at any rate, he said to Reavis, he said, you know, you're getting pretty feeble here. Maybe you ought to just back off of this a little bit, or go to town and see a doctor, take care of yourself. Well, Reavis wasn't having any parts of it. And James left, Delabo left, because he had other business to take care of at the time around the mountain. And so he did that, and then he wound up back at the JF Ranch. At any rate, when he got to the ranch, this was sometime later, come to find out Reavis hadn't been by the ranch yet. And so he questioned if anybody'd seen him, and they said no, he hadn't passed that way, which was something that he always did. So Delabo decided to backtrack the trail and see if he could find what was going on here. Well, he did. He found Reavis's body about 3 miles from his ranch, and he'd been dead for a little while, for the amount of time that, at least the amount of times that Delabo had been taking care of his business. The burros were still tied up, and they were in pretty bad shape, but they were still alive. But they were there, and Reavis was dead. So at that point, he just gathered up all the bones, and they put it by the side of the road and put a rock up on top of it and marked the place. I don't know what happened to the burros. There was no documentation on the burros. But at any rate, hikers were not leaving the original burial site alone. And so what happened was the grave site was changed, and it was moved over, ironically, onto an Indian ruin area. I'm sure he didn't have any say in that. But at any rate, that's the way that worked. Reavis in 1896, we assume it was in the middle of April when he died. He was gone from the Superstition Mountain. How he died, or if it was the Indians or the mountain or whatever it was, we don't know. Not for sure. And that is just another one of the mysteries of the Superstition Mountain. Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.